Really delighted the next speaker's here to share her vast amount of experience with us. On a personal note, she's been a massive support to me. When I discovered all of this back in 2015, I randomly contacted her via email, and she was so generous with her time and information, giving me lots of help. She's been a doctor for over 30 years, 23 of those as a GP partner. She runs groups in primary care settings and in the community with the aim of enabling lifestyle changes. A big focus of this is reversing type 2 diabetes and also reducing insulin dosage for type 1s. Her latest project is Supper Club, where she invites healthcare professionals for dinner. You can learn more about lifestyle medicine. So, Dr. Joanne McCormack, it's such a pleasure you're here. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Gail. So, when Gail asked me to speak about guidelines, I didn't like to tell her that my heart sank. I have to look at guidelines, but I'm a person who likes having fun, really. I'm the sort of person who, when I went skiing, went to the top of the mountain with my friends at the end of the day, had a few vins chaud, and then skied down as fast as I could, cutting the corners. So I do like fun. So I'd like to try something with you guys, just so I've got an idea of my audience. So if you don't mind, would you all just close your eyes just for a minute? And then I'd like you to raise your hands in the air gently if you like guidelines. This is so nobody else can see whose hands are in the air. So I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Probably less than 20, I would think, in the whole room. You can open your eyes now. So that's how guidelines send me to sleep. Part of the trouble is that they're just too long. They go on for pages and pages and pages. And from my point of view, with diabetes, people with diabetes have got carbohydrate intolerance. And if they stop eating carbohydrates, they'll mostly get better. That's my view. It's very simplistic, but it took just a few seconds to say. So from that point of view, I really dislike guidelines that run to certainly tens, if not hundreds of pages. But Gail asked me to do it, and it's very important. It's important to say as well that I'm actually a very conservative, with a small c, minded GP who doesn't want to get into any trouble. I'd absolutely hate it if I ended up in trouble with my colleagues, with the medical director, with the GMC, with the MDU, with anyone. So I'm actually a very careful doctor. And so I'm a careful doctor, but don't like guidelines, mainly because they're contradictory and they're too long. But I've gone through the guidelines with nice and sign and just picked out the salient points. This is something that Dave Haslam said at the RCGP conference a few years ago. Guidelines are not tramlines, so we are allowed to deviate from them. And this is a bit about me. I was a GP for 23 years. At that meaning, I had my own practice. I was in partnership with 4 other doctors, and we had 2 or 3 nurses, a couple of healthcare assistants, and so on. This is what I do now. I run behavioural change groups. In those, we aim to get rid of diabetes, send it into remission, get people who are pre-diabetic to go into the non-diabetic range, talk about metabolic syndrome reversal. I actually get a lot of slim people coming to my groups, which surprises me. A lot of people with problems from hypertension through to migraine through to PCOS. Well, they might be thinner, they might not be. But actually a lot of people who don't need to lose weight come to my groups, and an increasing number of people with type 2 diabetes who are slim come to my groups, which is interesting. And the aim is to reduce medication. So one of the things I do in my groups, well, one of the many aims is to reduce medication. I bring along a bag of drugs that have been returned. And a lot of people are really pleased to see those drugs. This is something you can do. You can lift out all the boxes of drugs that are returned and actually just talk about them. When people adopt a better lifestyle, they need less painkillers, they need less antihypertensives, they need less drugs for diabetes, they need, what other sorts of drugs? A lot of people give up allergy medication, antihistamines, and I see David nodding there, and inhalers. And one lady who came along, and she was coming for a medication review, and she hadn't ordered her inhalers in about a year, and I said, "Oh, what's happened?" And she said, "Oh, I don't know. My asthma's got a lot better." And I said, "What have you changed?" She said, "Not much." And she said, "I've gone on the 5-2. Well, if you do the 5-2 diet very well, you're going on a low carbohydrate diet. A little bit about Sarah Holberg, just before we go on to the guidelines. So Sarah Holberg, a doctor in the US who works with Verta and reverses diabetes, and I think it was 60% or so of patients at 1 year. She said that treating diabetes involves ignoring the guidelines. And you can see her TEDx talk that talks about that. And when I heard it, I was a bit alarmed. But I think that what guidelines do is that they accidentally switch your brain off. They make you feel that the learned and the good and the great and the highly intelligent people of our country, who know much more than us, have got together in a big committee, and they must have produced something that's solid and proper and right. And it switches your brain off because you think, well, I'll just do what they do or what they say and I'll be fine. But that isn't true, because when you look at the guidelines carefully, they're very contradictory. And some of them are just plain wrong. Like if I think about, say, alcohol, it's a very simple thing. So there's a stipulation you have so many units of alcohol per week, okay, and no more than that. But when you think about that, that's rubbish. Because what if you're an alcoholic? That's ridiculous. You can't possibly say, well, I'll try and stick to 14 or 21 units a week. Or what if you even just can't stop at 2 or 3, but you're not an alcoholic? It's rubbish, isn't it? So now I'm going to pick out the bits of the guidelines that are helpful for diabetes. And feel free to disagree with them or to counter, think about questions so you can counter what I'm saying. So, by all means photograph this. These are the sections that I find most useful of NICE Guidance number 28 from December 2015, updated in August 2019. This is really not my forte. I really hate it. It makes me nervous talking about guidelines, but these are the ones. And I've actually learned to parrot them because they're actually quite helpful when people say, oh, but Dr. McCormack, you're not following guidance. I say, well, actually I am. I think you'll find in section 1.1.1 of the 2015 guidance, which was updated in August 2019, I think you'll find that it specifies that I'm allowed to give individualised advice. And I think you'll find in section 1.2.4 that groups are recommended. So let's just look at some of these in a bit more detail. Oh yes, so Sam very comprehensively went through the Eat Well guide. So one of the things people say to me is, oh well, you're supposed to follow the Eat Well guide. And I'll say, well, it was actually put together by a lot of people from the food processing industry, and it's not individualised, so therefore it's completely in contradiction with NICE guidance. End of. And it is. You cannot give individualised advice if you're looking at a third of a plate of carbohydrate. And if people think I'm sort of being a bit like, I know better than you, well, sadly, 10 years ago, I actually tried to have a third of my plate as carbohydrate because I thought I wasn't healthy enough because I wasn't eating enough of it. And that's how taken in I was. Because I actually believed that SACN, the committee that decides food safety, I actually believed that SACN would have been composed of learned dietitians, learned professors of endocrinology, and learned obesity specialists, and they would know what they're talking about. I didn't realise they came from Kellogg's. And one of the other things I do is I say, don't eat rubbish British food. Lots of people in our country come from different backgrounds and they have a tradition of eating really well in other countries, and they come here and they eat jammy dodgers. It's just not right. And it's a fact that there are no essential carbohydrates. That is actually just a fact. So if you ever get a runner coming to you, often it's runners, often it's very, very disciplined people who get an awful lot of exercise will say, well, you're just wrong, you've got to eat carbohydrate. And I say, well, maybe you do today, and maybe you'd have to wean yourself off it, but you don't really have to, not if you don't want to. And the other problem with the Eat Well guide is it's not low GI, it's actually quite high GI. And that is actually contrary to NICE guidance. Okay, so here's nice guidance. 28. Adopt an individualised approach to diabetes care that's tailored to the needs and circumstances of adults with type 2 diabetes. And it's taking into account their personal preferences. So if they want to do a low carbohydrate diet, they've got a right to. If they want to do a meat-only diet, they've got a right to. If they want to be a vegan, they've got a right to. If they want to be a vegetarian, they've got a right to. It's got to start with the negotiation between you and them. And you're meant to reassess the needs and circumstances at each review. And you're meant to think about whether you can stop any medicines that are not effective. So for instance, with the SGLT2s, what's the point of taking a drug that makes you pee out all the sugar that you've eaten too much of? Wouldn't it be better just to eat less sugar? And on that point, most of my patients tell me they don't eat sugar. And they probably don't. They're probably being honest, but maybe they're drinking the sugar. Or maybe they're eating lots of carbohydrates that turn into sugar. And it's important not to offend them and get their back up, because otherwise they won't listen to what comes next. So at the back, I'm just going to reinforce that there are lots of leaflets from the PHC, including ones which explain all the infographics and how much sugar, say, if you eat 100 grams of basmati rice, how much sugar, teaspoons of sugar it turns into. And they're very useful for showing to patients in groups or individually. Okay, so not many people know this, and it actually started in 2009, but 1.2.4 says, offer group education programs as the preferred option. Provide an alternative of equal standard for a person unable or unwilling to participate in group education. So in our area, the waiting time for programs like, say, Expert, it's not Expert in our area, it's the local one, but it's very, very long, and people have gone off the idea by the time they get to the top of the waiting list, or they don't fancy having, 6 sessions or whatever. So I offer individual groups, and they can come once or they can come repeatedly. Some of them have been coming on and off for maybe about 2 or 3 years, but most of them solve their problems, and the ones that are coming back now just come to talk to the rest of the group and tell them how they've got on and encourage the group. Okay, so a little bit about sign. So when I tried to put the sign app onto my phone, the App Store wouldn't accept sign. But when I put in Scottish Intercollegiate guidelines, it came up. And it's actually an extremely easy to use app. Whereas NICE I couldn't find, correct me if I'm wrong, I couldn't find anything that was as easy via NICE. But the one we're looking at is the 116, which is not to do with drugs. The 154 is to do with pharmacological management. And they cover all those areas like healthy eating, exercise, alcohol, groups and teaching, blood testing and lipids. Okay, so this is where SIGN says that you've got a variety of options. And isn't that right? Because your patients will want a variety of options. Some of them will want low calorie, some of them will want the 600 calories a day for a while, like Professor Taylor suggests. Some of them will still be, I find actually hardly anybody wants to do a low-fat diet these days, but some of them will want to, and particularly I think if they're vegetarian or vegan, they'll be more keen on trying to have low-fat because obviously they're having more carbs in their natural diet, but some will. It gives you permission to follow a low-carbohydrate diet or to suggest it to your patients. And they suggest restricting the total amount of dietary carbohydrate. They say that a minimum of 50 grams a day appears to be safe for up to 6 months. And they say to offer individualised advice to encourage weight loss, with other things as well, lifestyle. So I cover sleep, I cover relaxation, I cover movement and exercise. But it might surprise you to know that I suggest people go down to as low as 30 grams a day if they need to. And some of them actually make the choice to go down lower than that. I even had somebody at one of my groups who was on a zero carb diet, but that was his choice. But you see, it's up to people, isn't it? It's not really up to people who make up guidelines. If somebody comes to me and says, well, I've decided to go on to a zero carb diet because, and sometimes it's because of fear of pesticides in vegetables, or sometimes it's because of food addiction, that's their choice, not mine. And, it's not my role to try and dissuade them from their own sort of feelings about what's right for their body and mind. So a little bit about this. So Sign points out that you can get much better results if you actually think about the psychology. Different interventions have been shown to improve self-management, metabolic and psychological outcomes, and they actively encourage you to think of things psychologically. They say follow a theoretical model, so I'm going to show you one of those. And they also say you could advise them to follow a computer-generated course. So you heard about one earlier with Dr. Sadra, the low carb program, and at the back there I did have some expert guides, and they're very good as well. Particularly the high fat guides. What's it called? I think it's Eat Fat expert guide. Eat Fat it's called. This is from Sign. Clinical interventions aimed at dietary change are more likely to be successful if a psychological approach based on a theoretical framework is included. And this is it. This has come from Jen Unwin. You can tell Jen I use this. And I do use it. So I've asked for some cards to be handed out with my website on them. And you can see what I put on it. I mean, basically I had lots of enthusiasm at the beginning. I put on lots of information at the beginning and lots of links. And now I just put on the dates of my groups. And my groups run on a psychological model, which starts off with your goals. So everybody's got their own goals, which they mostly keep to themselves. Some of them are not shy and they actually shout them out and say, well, I'd like to do such and such. But when I ask a group of people, and it's probably between, the groups of people between 6 and 15 usually, if I say to them, a year from now you're a lot healthier, what does healthier mean to you? Most of them say, I'll lose weight. Some of them say, I'll be on less medication. Some of them will say, I'll have more energy. But then I'll say, well, what would you do if you had more energy or on less medication or you lost weight? What would you do? What difference would that make to your life? And then, depending on what's come before, they might then say, I'd be less tired, I'd be able to walk more quickly. But I'll say, what would you do then? You know, what would be really exciting? What would be nice? And one lady said, well, I'd be able to fit into all my own dancing dresses and I'd be able to go dancing again. And sure enough, after a year, she did. And she said I'd saved her hundreds of pounds because she was able to fit into all her old dresses, which is great. And then another lady said that she'd really like to go to our football match, because last time she'd gone, she actually demonstrated with her hand. She said, well, I'm very big round here. And when I was going through the turnstiles, I got stuck. And it was really, really embarrassing. And I'd love to confidently go back to see Liverpool, it was, and know that I would get through the turnstiles. So I said, well, that sounds great, and actually that's the sort of thing I'd like you all to think about. You know, for me, I wouldn't enjoy going to football, but what's that equivalent? Because she was so enthusiastic about it. She just really, really wanted to go back and see her football team. And actually she's been back this year, and they're going to win, aren't they? And she's been back, and I knew she'd been back because I always share my email address with patients. They can always contact me. And she sent me a photograph of herself at the game. And that's the really rewarding thing about this, because although you're doing it in a group, you're doing it in an individualised fashion. And so those people have got individualised goals, which are really exciting, you know, for them. And so that's what it starts with. So the G is the goal. A year from now, you're a lot healthier. What does healthier mean to you? The R is resources. So we're thinking about what we all learn differently. I used to be a GP trainer, and they taught me that some people learn, you know, through mind mapping. Some people learn in a didactic fashion. Some people like doing online courses. You know, how are you going to learn about doing this? And how are your patients going to learn about low carb? And so the resources I suggest for them are, I've got my website, which has got links into other websites. And feel free to do a link to my website on your practice, you know, on your practice website if you like. There's no problem. I don't have any advertising. I don't accept any pay-per-clicks or anything like that. It's just a simple website, because 10 minutes isn't long enough with a patient. An hour isn't really long enough, which is why I run repeated once a month. I do another group at the moment it's in 2 practices and a church hall. So the resources are things like dietdoctor.com, things like fatismyfriend.co.uk, which is my one, things like the lowcarbprogram.com, and then all the books and recipe books. Often I'll take a pile of recipe books along. I'll buy them in places like The Works, and I'll sell, they give them to you at discount, and I'll just sell them to people at cost. Or if they can't afford them, I'll just give them a book. You'll see there's some books at the back, which are mostly recipe books now. Most of them have gone. But if you want to take any and donate to the website, please do. But not to me, not to my website. Donate to the charity, which is phcuk.org. And take one of my little cards. They've got that website on them. But those are the resources. And more resources come up all the time. All the time people tell me about new books and new websites that are very helpful. And patients tell me as well, when I explain about low carb these days, in the past they'd never have heard of it 6 years ago, but these days quite a few of them say things like, oh, is that like what Tim Noakes does? Or my neighbour, she does low carb, she's lost a lot of weight, or whatever. So they often know about it, but they often tell you about new resources. And the third one's a very interesting one, increments. Because when I started this, I was terribly enthusiastic. And I'd say, oh, just do low carb, it'd be brilliant, like it's fantastic. Just if you feel like doing it tomorrow, just get on and do it. Read about it tonight and just do it, it's brilliant. But some of my patients became very ill, not in being admitted to hospital ill, but feeling really poorly with low carb flu. Yeah? And I didn't actually do it suddenly myself. When I thought about it, I did it very gradually because I'm actually quite a skeptical person. And so when I first heard about it, I thought, well, this can't be right because, it's not in the guidelines. And I don't know anybody else who's doing it. But it was just talking initially about eating real food and avoiding additives and avoiding sugar. And I thought, well, there can't be anything wrong with that. But because I was skeptical, I did it slowly. I did it in increments. I did it over the course of a few months. And then the final changes when I gave up things like pasta and brown bread were right at the end. So I didn't get low carb flu because I did it so slowly. But some people's personalities lend themselves to doing it quickly. So it's up to them, but they'll get low carb flu for about 3 weeks. And the fourth one is noticing. So I say to people, notice it in yourself. Notice that your dress fits more easily. Notice that your belt's on a few notches, less. Notice that your face looks like it's not so tired. But David and Jen talk about the doctor or the nurse making heartfelt compliments. You look fantastic. Wow, you look so much younger actually. Whatever, you look like you've got a lot more energy. There's a spring in your step. All sorts of things you can notice about your patients. And that's the final bit about noticing and then grinning because it'll make you smile. Like I was so happy for my patient who managed to go to see Liverpool and go through the turnstiles without fear. And she sent me a photograph of herself with her big trousers out to here. And it was just so lovely. It was amazing. Yeah, so these are a few things at the end, just about things that really cause a lot of trouble. So blood glucose testing. So I live in Warrington. And we're now we're outside Solihull, aren't we? So I'd like you to go to Warrington whenever you get a chance and don't have a map or a sat-nav and see if you can go the back routes where they've got no road signs. So that's how I feel about not giving people blood glucose meters. And that is such a busy, dreadful slide and I feel ashamed of it. But that's how it looks on the guidelines, and I thought I'm not going to tidy it up. It just looks a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of the other. And the only thing I'd say about it is, how can you know where you're going? Or how can you know what happens to your body? Like I've got a chap called Stuart, and he reduced his HbA1c from 115 to about 35, and it's been maintained for 3 years. Stuart uses a blood sugar meter. He knows that he can eat rice and nothing happens to his blood sugar. He knows if he eats porridge it goes up to about 11, so he tends to have a run afterwards and then it stays more like 7. But how can you know anything about your diabetes without a blood sugar meter? And if you cannot get them supplied for free, if you won't supply them for free in your practice, if people are breathing down your neck, well, encourage your people to buy them, and buy in a few and give them to people, you know, who can't afford them. Because how on earth can they know what happens if they don't see evidence of what's happening to their blood sugar in real time? And the other thing that's happened recently is that you get patients who are actually quite annoyed with the medical profession for following guidance slavishly, and they buy themselves those what do you call them? The 24-hour meters. I don't know why it's just Freestyle Libre. So they buy themselves a Freestyle Libre, which last time I heard was £48 for 2 weeks from Asda. But if you think £100 in a month, how much do people spend on holidays? How much do people spend on food? £100 in a month. Maybe you'll have don't have takeaways for a month. But a lot of people are doing this for themselves, and they see what happens real time with the blood sugars. And they'll see if they have cornflakes, it goes up to 15, but if they have bacon and eggs, it goes up to 6. And then they learn and they know, and it's not forever. I agree. I mean, there has been a lot of research into blood glucose testing, but that's been in the era when we've been advising people to have a third of their plate as carbohydrates. So it's no wonder that the blood sugars are high all the time. And it's a short-term learning tool. So I ignore the guidance on blood sugar testing. I advise absolutely everybody to get a blood sugar meter, even the pre-diabetics, because I don't really know if sometimes the blood sugars are shooting up if they have a lemon rind pie or whatever. And nor do they. So if they want to get one, they do. If they can get a free one and some sticks, fantastic. But I encourage absolutely everybody to get one once they're diabetic. Questions? I haven't said too much about my groups. I have said, don't know how much time I've got. 3 minutes. So I haven't said too much about my groups, but just ask away.
Anyone got any questions for Joe?
Hi, thank you. My question is, with your groups, is it a set programme where you have weeks 1 to 6, or do you just roll it and carry it on the whole way? So do people start at a set time, or can they just join it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I started off, it came out of the feeling that I couldn't possibly cover things in 10 minutes, because some very clever people got it, and they went away and read about it and did it, but other people were just more confused. So I felt that an hour of my time, it was actually better use of my time to have 6 people there for a whole hour than to see one person after another 6 times in an hour. So your question was, do I have a rule? Yeah, so initially I wrote it out what I was going to cover, and it's on my website. So I've asked for the little cards to be passed around to everybody, and if you go on the website, Fat is my friend, you'll see it goes through weeks 1 to 8. So the idea was we covered breakfast one time, lunches, snacks, dinners, intermittent fasting, sleep, yoga. And so we actually, every time we go through some of the basics, and every time we add in one bit of detail. That's the idea. And the idea to make it flexible is that people can actually start it at any time. They can just dip in, and they can come as often as they want. I mean, I haven't really had any there is actually one person in one of the groups at the moment who I regard as a hanger-on, because he's actually solved, as far as I'm concerned, he's solved everything. He's absolutely fine. He's not pre-diabetic anymore. He's slim. He's following, understands the diet very well. He asks complex questions. He actually doesn't need to be there anymore. But he's the only one in I can't remember, I think I've been doing it for 3 or 4 years now in groups. But so that's what I'm doing. But the buts. So I've got one surgery I go to on a voluntary basis at the moment, and the doctors and nurses love it, to the extent that they're referring so many patients they're standing room only. Now, what we've decided to do with that group is split it. So I'm just going to do a group which is just new people once a month, and our expert patient who's expert trained is going to do the follow-up group. So he's going to do the more complex questions, and for people who want more in-depth. And really we just try and pick a different topic each time, just so that we roll through and don't, so we keep it fresh, so there is something new in each group.
Any more questions?
Is there anyone that shouldn't do a low carb diet?
very good question. I think people who are on terribly high carb diets will have a terrible shock if they change them too quickly. You know, it really could be dreadful. And in fact, I did it as a teenager. As a teenager, I went on to Atkins because I thought it was a bit fat. And I was so poorly, I felt so sick. I thought I couldn't possibly do, I mustn't do, you know, it's obviously bad for me. And a national diabetes specialist said that to me a few years ago. He said, oh, I tried low carb, it didn't suit me. And the thing is, if you do it too quickly, if you don't wean yourself onto it, you will feel poorly and you may think it doesn't suit you. But I can't really think of anybody who wouldn't benefit from real food. I don't know, Campbell, if you've got something to say.
I have just some thoughts on that. So there are a few groups of people where you consider an absolute contraindication. Porphyria, because the risk of acute porphyria crisis. Then those of you who went to medical school or those from other health disciplines, if you remember your biochemistry lectures of all those inborn errors in metabolism that you learned, which you never come across, but you might do rarely. So people that cannot use fat for fuel, pretty rare, but they exist. So they're the absolute relative contraindications. So as in, do it, but think more widely, not just the kind of 10-minute appointment.
Yeah, and that's probably why I couldn't think of anybody, because I haven't seen anybody with porphyria or an inborn error of metabolism, so they couldn't metabolize fat.
Yeah,
they will exist.
Knowing what could come around the corner is that, so you can kind of relax the others. But it is, so the relative ones is pregnancy, not to do it necessarily, but this is a whole different ballgame. People that have just had another serious diagnosis of something, give it some thought. Psychological eating disorders definitely shouldn't not consider it, but there's a wider piece to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting about eating disorder. Pregnancy, there are documented cases of a lot of pregnant women who followed low carb diets. Obviously, all the people with gestational diabetes I found in our area now, they're being put onto low carb diets. And pregnant women, if they just cut out sugar, they're on a lower carb diet. So that's consideration. Got, I think, one question over there up front.
Thank you. Regarding group consultations, how do you deal with the issue of confidentiality?
Yeah, so they all are invited into the group consultation. I suppose, let me think. So, anything they volunteer themselves in the group situation, that's for them to say and their choice to divulge that. I would be very careful about what I said to them in terms of, like, I wouldn't say something like, oh, do you remember when you came to see me last week about such and such, and you asked, even if it's related to the diabetes, you know, you asked about that. I might ask for permission. I might say, would you like to discuss, or would this be a good time to discuss that issue that we talked about last week? And then they might explain it in their own words. So I'm just a little bit careful about how I do things that way. I wouldn't give them their results publicly, obviously. You know, like say if they came in and I had everybody's results, I would have, like David does, he does graphs. I'll often do graphs for them, and I'll individually give them their graphs. You know, and I wouldn't sort of tell the room how they've got on. Do you know what I mean? But they might say, oh, this is fantastic. I've gone down from 77 to 52 or whatever. You know, so that's how I deal with it. I mean, I suppose you could have a code. I haven't got a written code of conduct. We occasionally have somebody who behaves what I consider to be inappropriately in a meeting. You know, maybe like by taking over. And I think at that stage in that practice, I did actually have a little brief code of conduct. You know, like these are, you know, the fire exits are there. We need to, you know, let people talk and not interrupt, and, you know, a few things like that. But confidentiality hasn't been an issue, but I am careful.
Thank you.
So one more question? Or two?
Oh, sorry.
You talked about sugars and cutting down on sugars, but a lot of people will ask, what about sweeteners like Splenda or stevia? Any comments?
Yeah, so that's a very common question. So I regard them as a transition product. So when you're changing over from high levels of sugar, you know, maybe it's helpful to actually go on to some Splenda or some stevia, for instance. But the buts. It seems to me, that's the phrase of my mother's, but the buts. So it seems to me that with every sweetener we've had from, Hermesitis, I remember in the 60s, it's been fine, hasn't it? It's been heralded as a great product and harmless. And then a few years later, they've got a new sweetener, and the old sweetener causes cancer in rats or whatever. And it seems to me I'm cynical. So every single sweetener we've had, and this is what I say to the patients, every single sweetener we've had has seemed to be safe, and then 10 years down the line, they invent a new one, and the old ones are all unsafe. And so I'm cynical about sweeteners. And I talk about people resetting their sweetometer. So getting used to food that's more savoury, food that's less sweet. And so if sweeteners help in that, fine, but they shouldn't be something that you end up on. Try and wean. I talk to people about just weaning themselves off sweeteners.
Thank you so much. Right.